As I watched SmackDown this week, I kept seeing the hashtag Fire Ronda Rousey, and it made me want to dig into the topic, maybe find a clear reason why. As is sometimes the nature of Twitter, this isn't always as easy as you might think. Before I begin, I suppose I ought to present the position I'm coming from. I'd describe myself as a lapsed fan of Ronda Rousey. I was a guy who used to wake up at 5 AM UK time and watch Ronda's UFC fights. Then, after she usually won in a couple of minutes, would go back to sleep for a bit before getting up for work. I was thrilled when she appeared at WrestleMania 31 with The Rock, and even more so when she got in the ring at WrestleMania 34. Everything after WrestleMania 35 has admittedly been a bit off to me. I feel like she should have been more of a special attraction than a regular roster member, and she definitely doesn't feel like a special attraction anymore. When the whole issue with Sasha Banks and Naomi happened earlier this year, my hope for the women's tag team titles would be that Ronda and Shayna Baszler would take those belts and hold them forever. Back then, it had only been a barely acknowledged fact that the two were friends behind the scenes, as they'd been seen in training videos for this year's WrestleMania. But at the time I'm writing this, they are regularly together on SmackDown, so I might still get my wish down the line. As I watched SmackDown this week, I was keeping an eye on Twitter, and the Fire Ronda Rousey hashtag was trending, inspiring me to look further into it. Before I get deeper into this, I'd like to note that the points I'm making are based on just a couple of days of research, and if I'm missing something, I'd really appreciate if you let me know in the comments. I might even make a follow-up video if there's enough that I haven't covered here. At a cursory first glance, some of it seemed to come from fans who just simply prefer other women on the WWE roster. But then I found that a fair bit of it seems to come specifically from Sasha Banks fans. Then I found a clip from Kurt Angle's podcast from a year ago that people are bringing back up now, where Sasha flat out, in no uncertain terms, says she didn't like the star treatment Ronda walked into WWE with. While I completely understand why Sasha, or anybody on the WWE roster might think like this, I don't really take her side on this occasion. This is, however, the same issue that CM Punk had with The Rock coming back and taking the title, and thus the WrestleMania main event away from him. I leaned towards Punk's side back then. These days, not so much. One thing I'd like to point out early on is that this podcast aired in November of 2021. And Ronda wasn't even an active member of the roster at the time, given that she would return at the Royal Rumble 2 months later. Admittedly, I haven't sat through the whole thing, and some fans have put forward the view that Sasha was being in character, but at the same time this was recorded, Ronda wasn't around, and by the time she returned, Banks and Naomi were an active tag team, while Ronda won the Rumble, so I can't see why Sasha's comments would be made to build to a match when the two were clearly on different paths. It's also not like this would be a first time dream match either, as the two wrestled at the 2019 Royal Rumble, with Ronda winning that night. Sasha says, and I'm quoting here, "Who is you and what you do?" which I'm aware sounds awful in my accent. But the point is she clearly has little respect for Ronda's previous accomplishments. This is baffling to me for reasons I'll get into later in this video, but this is who Ronda Rousey is. According to an article published in November 2022 by Give Me Sport, which I'll link in the description, Ronda main evented 2 of the 10 highest drawing UFC pay-per-views in history, with both drawing over 1.1 million buys. In comparison, there are only 2 WWE pay-per-views that ever beat that number, WrestleMania 23 and 28. Before any of this, Ronda Rousey was the face of a division that the UFC didn't even want to promote initially. Along with the likes of Miesha Tate, Holly Holm, Amanda Nunes and others, Ronda drew millions of dollars at the box office. Around the same time, Sasha and her peers aspired to the same thing in WWE, taking women's wrestling further than it had ever gone before, even to the main event of WrestleMania. As a fan who appreciated both, I'd argue that the WWE Women's Revolution, TM, and the rise of women in UFC happening around the same time is no coincidence. To make myself really clear, I think it's unfair and even narrow-minded to consider Ronda as someone who was just handed everything just because she made a name elsewhere. To broaden the scope a bit, nearly 40 years ago, WrestleMania 1 was built on the integration of stars from other worlds, from Cyndi Lauper to Mr. T to Liberace. WrestleMania 11 was main evented by an NFL outside linebacker, whatever that means, which is my one English joke for this video. Sometimes WWE has gone overboard in involving famous people from outside the ring. I imagine if she were around at the time, Sasha would have hated the horrible guest host era of Raw, where celebrities would come in for a week, get their lines wrong, and plug some shite movie that they're in. Can you tell I hated that too? Except the week that the Muppets were there. Now let me get back on track here by bringing up a modern equivalent. Logan Paul is another famous person who made his fame and infamy elsewhere. He drew over 1 million pay-per-view buys for his boxing match with Floyd Mayweather, and according to boxing promoter Eddie Hearn, his second match with KSI did 2 million, which would make it one of the 5th highest grossing pay-per-views ever. Logan also recently main evented Crown Jewel against Roman Reigns, after only 2 previous matches, and all 3 have been generally critically acclaimed. Admittedly, I'm not the closest follower of insider WWE news, but as far as I'm aware, you don't see many of WWE's male roster complaining about Logan being treated like a top star from the jump. There's even speculation of what dream match he could have at WrestleMania 39, assuming he's healed up from his injuries, implying that people are looking forward to more of Logan being featured prominently. I took way longer than I expected to in explaining why I don't agree with Sasha's comment, but the other reason that I found won't take that long to debunk. Reading further, I found an article from Forbes, linked down below, that claimed that the Fire Ronda hashtag came from a botched DDT in a Survivor Series match with Shotzi. Admittedly, I skipped that match on the night, so I didn't see the offending move, but having seen it since, this is just ridiculous. If Matthew of Botchamania has taught us anything, it's that botches happen all the time to any wrestler on any given night. If wrestlers were fired for a single botched spot, guess what? There'd be no wrestlers left. I broadened my last argument, so I'll do it again here. Every single one of us makes mistakes, and unless it's a really big one, most of us don't get fired for just one. Okay, rant over. I started this video by disclosing that I was at one point a fan of Ronda Rousey, and that might well colour my perception a bit. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and I'd also like to thank you if you stuck with me to the end. Thank you for watching yet another wrestling channel. If you enjoyed this, please comment, like or subscribe.